But then you have, there's always some source distribution. I guess
right.
Point source and MCMP.
Right. What we intended there is we didn't do anything special with the source distribution. We defaulted it, essentially.
Right. Okay, I mean, that's the default for scale.
So the no just means you're not going to provide it, that's all, right?
Right, so there would be some circumstances, for example, if we were doing a single misload, we would opt to, start the source in the misloaded assembly. But since the multiple misload commands here, we're just going to go with the uniform. And we're talking about new fuel rack here. There isn't really a misload in the new fuel rack. But I'm jumping forward really to talk about spent fuel. But for example, if we were doing something that were position dependent, that had a strong spatial dependence, we would use some non-uniform distribution. That's all that was trying to indicate. If there's a clearer way to do that, if it's confusing, then give us some feedback on that, particularly for the NEI document.
Yeah, so I guess what you would want us to say is yes, and then describe our source distribution as uniform. Is that the way you'd prefer to see this checklist?
I mean, I guess the question is that something that we want to see you discussed? So if you answered no, then like that, we would look at that very quizzically.
Yeah. Okay. The placeholder is to indicate we've thought about the source distribution.
Right.
The yes/no in my mind when I filled out my own checklist was that I didn't do anything different than the default. So no, I didn't change the source distribution from the default. But if that's not clear, we can say yes, we do have a source distribution, obviously, and it's uniform. We'll just change that to yes.
That one to me, was intuitive. I circled it, but I didn't put a question mark by it because I figured, in your note you say it's uniform, which just means you're using scale to use the default. So, I mean, I circled it, but I don't really have a question on it.
Okay.
But
all right. Well,
so it might be a way we're interpreting the heading for this column included. So I think some of us might be thinking that a no in the included column means there's no discussion included in the LAR.
Well, right. Okay, I understand that. We will think about. There may be a better way to say, included or not included, or there's some other header. That's one of the values of the explanation is if the yes/no is unclear, the explanation should get the job done.
Right. That should be good.
Agreed.
yeah. I mean, it's the checklist is to help us. It's not the definitive answer either.
Right.
I had a question about the fuel dimensions item. It says
Page 3.
Page 3, yeah, the fifth one. 1, 2, 3, fourth one. Multiple recent designs were considered. I guess it's just a general question. Why didn't you consider all of them?
Right. So in the write-up, we talk about all of them.
Because it's new fuel, right?
Yeah, new fuel, we're only interested in future, what we have now or future that's unburnt.
All right, that's fine. You can move on.
Right.
Actually, I also had a question about what you meant by bound water concrete for the storage area walls.
Hey, this is Casey Kennett. So overall, we based the concrete on the EPRI wet conservative concrete, but a criticism of that was that it didn't prove that it was conservative relative to real-world concretes and the aggregates found in real-world concretes. And so we found through a North Anna specification what ratios it used for cement, water, and aggregate, and what type of cement they used. And so specifically for the hydrogen bound in the concrete, we took an equation from New Reg CR 7171, which determines how much water remains in the cement paste throughout its life, and then we used the mixing ratios through the North Anna specification to determine how much water is in the cement alone. And so we did not take any credit for the aggregate in the concretes.
Do you have any idea what their hydrogen weight percent was in that for that calculation?
Yeah, it was, let me look it up. It was 0.25% hydrogen.
Okay, thank you.
Correct, you're welcome.
So the axial fuel position tolerance in your fuel geometry, skipping down to the tolerances section. I don't know if I recall seeing that tolerance before. Is that just like a shift in, like an uncertainty in where the fuel stack is, or?
Yeah, it's just an uncertainty in how tall the bottom nozzle is and the components that the assembly sits on. Just basically how far away from the concrete floor it is.
I mean, it's really intended to bound a series of minor design changes where, you know, if a vendor changes the bottom grid, for example, the bottom nozzle or the bottom grid even, it may change the initial position of those rods axially. It's not large, it's small, but that's just intended to recognize that they're not all identically in the same place when you go from batch to batch.
Well, you know, like that's a little bit different than a tolerance then, Bob. I mean, a tolerance would be, like you say, is you manufactured. I mean, like, we haven't seen this because, you know, we haven't considered it. They're all considered to be uniform.
So I took the bounding value, and then just to cover if there's any future design changes, to be able to analyze it, I also added a tolerance.
Bias or tolerance?
Well, I took a bounding value from the previous assembly design types.
So that just positions the fuel closer to the concrete reflector at the bottom?
Yeah.
Basically?
Yes.
Yeah.
I basically just added an uncertainty just in case a future design type is worse, so I'm able to analyze it.
Well, I think for a future design type, you'd have to include it as a bias and not as an uncertainty.
I think
if a future design is if all the fuel assemblies nominally are going to be closer, that would be a bias as opposed to just a manufacturing tolerance on the fuel assemblies that you're making today.
All right, so for this submittal, what we're talking about is recent designs. The analysis will bound the recent designs.
Right.
And then, so future changes, that would be an issue for evaluate a change to the bias.
Right. Well, I hear is like Amherst pointed, like on the first page, you say there's no future fuel is covered.
Well, no future fuel is covered in directly. In other words, I can't predict what we don't know about. However, you know, anytime you have a proposed change to an assembly, you have to evaluate it under 5059 as to whether or not you can, whether that fits into your existing analysis or not.
Right. So, I mean, I would say that you get a fuel design that's close to the concrete, that would have to be addressed under 5059.
Agreed.
And you know, like whether or not that takes up your, you know, like how much of that margin that you're reserving it takes up.
Right. We would agree with that.
Okay. Still on 3.
Extrapolation. Yeah, I just had a quick question. You noted on the code uncertainty that there was EALF extrapolation?
Yes.
Yes, that was, I don't, why is there extrapolation there?
We don't have, okay, the limiting condition is very low density water for optimum moderation. Mm-hmm. And the spectrum is a little bit harder than any of our crits that we have.
How much extrapolation do you know offhand?
The hardest crit we had an ELF of about 0.8. I've forgotten the next digit, and the final K calculation had an ELF of 1.1. We have a range of The lowest in our data is about 0.2. So 0.2 or 0.1? Casey, you may remember.
The ALF. Anybody remember?
No.
If I remember, I think we had a range of about 0.7, and we're extrapolating about 0.3. Again, we have, they're just, as far as we can tell, there aren't crits that handle this.
Mm-hmm.
But, okay.
Okay. Yep.
That's what we did. So we're still we're doing the final evaluation of this, but that's our intent, is to extrapolate our data, and that also, as you know, the uncertainty is a curve, so we're extrapolating the curve as well for the uncertainty.
Did you add any like extra margin because of the excessive extrapolation?
Well, we deemed it not excessive, but
Like 30?
we were thinking about that. So what do you have a recommendation?
No.
Okay.
I mean,
We're just talking here about how big that extrapolation is in reactivity terms. It's about 0.1% in K. So as far as the trend, it's a weak trend.
Okay.
yeah, I mean that feeds into how much of extrapolation or how you can justify that. I mean, if you had a strong trend or
Right. I mean,
it's hard to
depends on the
define,
trend.
but the further you get out there, the harder it is.
Right.
I mean, we don't have any experiments out there that are with a higher EALF than.
No, well, we have fast reactors, but no, we don't really have anything in this range.
How much margin do you have to the optimum moderation safety limit?
Without the NRC margin, we have about 1.5%. So with the NRC percent margin, Dominion holds about a 0.5% margin.
So you're about the whole analysis that you're saying is a 1.5% away from the regulatory limit.
Right. Sum up all the bias uncertainties and the whole shebang, and you wind up 1.5% below.
Okay.
I don't have any questions on that page. I have to leave early, Kent, probably in 15 minutes. Can I ask a question? Can I maybe skip forward a little?
Sure. Amber's got to leave in a couple of minutes, so he's going to skip forward in the list.
Okay.
I guess the major one that I had was in, I don't know if it was major, but one that jumped out at me was, let me find it, hold on. What's that? So section 8 on page 4, under depletion model considerations. The last one is fuel clad creep and grid growth.
Yes.
That you included it, evaluated it as a bias, and then I see that, so you mentioned clad creep and grid growth, and then when I jump to page 5 on the tolerances for fuel creep, you have a line item for creep bias for depleted in the fuel clad OD, but I don't see anything for grid growth accounted here. Is it somewhere else, or?
It's in there. We take it as a bias.
Yeah, it's on the next page.
I didn't get that far.
On page 6.
Clad creep and grid growth on page 6 are taken as biases.
I see, because it was under, we got one under tolerance. Okay.
The one under tolerance is probably misleading.
That's my fault, because I didn't get that far in the report, so I probably would have found that. Can I ask what you did for that in terms of pin pitch?
So we do, first we have to decide how much grid growth there is. So we've done the work to pull up some data. Top grids grow more than bottom grids. Top grids are the ones that are most important. So we choose to use the top grid data, which is the more important because of where the flux is, where the importance is for burn fuel in the spent fuel pool, but also because that's the biggest growth. So that's the data we went with. We come up with a function that, I'm not going to say it bounds all the data, but it treats all the data, fairly. So there's not a lot of data that's available to us. But what data is there, we represent that with a curve that should be conservative to represent, and we use the top grid growth for the entire assembly. So we spread the pin pitch uniformly in the Keno model by the percentage increase in grid growth that's relevant for that burn-up.
Do you remember do you have like a range of percent grid growth across all burn-ups?
Well, yeah, if I'm trying to remember here, I think it's in the range of 0.3% for 40 or 50 gigawatt days per ton.
Okay.
No, it's not large. The data for the older materials, not the improved lower growth materials, is probably at least twice that. Maybe 6 or 0.7% growth for that burn-up range. So in the Triton model, we do an assessment of what that growth would do to the isotopics. It actually makes the isotopics slightly more benign. We don't deplete with the maximum grid growth. We deplete with the average grid dimension over the burn-up range that we're looking at. So there's a minor difference in the isotopic content due to the expansion of the grid, and then we carry that into the Keno model where we do the full endpoint expansion of the grid, and we do that uniformly up and down the whole assembly.
Yeah, Bob, this was some of my questions too. Going in is that, I just say that this will be an area that would warrant more detail rather than less in your submittal.
Right, okay. I know it's a recent issue, right?
How you got to where you are and why what you're doing is the right way to do it.
All right, we will have a robust write-up on on grid growth and clad creep.
Clad creep, though, is going to be similar to what you've already seen, I believe, from Millstone, right?
Yes.
And that write-up was okay in the past. So we probably will do something similar for clad creep that we've already done.
Yeah, I mean, the questions here we're having are with grid growth.
Robust.
Well, I think on the positive side, even though it's not official, I don't know how to say this. It's not something that's been part of analyses in the past. It is part of this analysis. Right. So you will see an analysis of clad grid growth and its effect on K, and we will take it as a bias. Okay.
Do you have a reference for the under depleted fuel content nuclide selection on page 4? Do you use for the volatile fission product?
Yeah, we're doing the same thing we did for Millstone 2.
Okay.
There's a new reg.
Is a new reg or something?
Yeah, there's guidance. Basically, it's the alternate source term guidance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and this is also done for again Indian Point.
Okay.
And there's going to be a paper at the June A&S meeting about this.
Yeah, well, we won't be there to see it.
Okay.
unfortunately. I think my last question is the boundary conditions for the rack model. I noted that there's you used for the axial direction mirror boundary condition. So you're not modeling any water reflector region, or are you?
Oh, there's a water reflector above and below. We go down to the concrete on the bottom side. We go up, some distance, 50 centimeters or so into the water on the top side.
Okay. All right. And maybe an editorial note on page 5 under tolerances for fuel geometry. You have the burn-up worth and measured burn-up under fuel geometry tolerances. I was just wondering why they weren't under the fuel content.
That's a good observation. Yep, we'll move it.
That's all I got. I gotta leave in like 5-10 minutes, so sorry for.
No, it's fine. I mean, no, it's the grid growth is a question that I had several aspects on. We're going to ask anyhow, so now we got those out of the way. They were pretty much next on the list anyhow. Then, so we've talked about the grid growth. We've mentioned that. We've talked about the Triton depletion, and you guys incorporating lessons learned from the Millstone amendment. The next thing I've got is the idea of the burnable absorbers, and you say Pyrex, that you've got burnable absorbers. They're included. They're bounding except for Pyrex, only used in initial cycles. Yeah. And I was wondering how you're treating that.
Right. There's a small difference in the effect of Pyrex versus the next burnable poison that's quote bounding, and that's the Zerk-clad. This is the difference of Zerk-clad versus the stainless clad of the Pyrex. The content is about the same. The water displacement's the same, and so the effects are very, very similar. But the Pyrex was only used way back. I'm not even sure there's any fuel left in the pool that had Pyrex, but nevertheless, there's a large amount of decay time, 20-plus years, that's uncredited to handle that small difference between the design of the Pyrex rods and the design of the later BPRA.
There's also those issues, these old legacy kind of assemblies that might have the one-off aspect that we might have here, they can be dealt with as is, as opposed to...
Yes, understand. There's a couple other things, Kent. We'll put in there a plot of our fuel density, net fuel density as a function, sort of theoretical density as a function of batch. And what you'll be able to see is that the early batches had much lower fuel density, which is also a pretty powerful conservatism. We're not crediting that. So we can point to multiple lines of reasoning why we don't need to handle the minor difference between Pyrex and the other BPRA. But you're right, we could just say what's the actual burn-up of those assemblies, and show that there's margin above the burn-up curve.
Well, I mean, what I just heard was you're going to treat them as is, but take a different tact.
Right. I mean, we can do both if you'd like.
I just need enough.
Okay. Well, yeah, there's a number of lines there that would support the argument. Okay. We'll talk about adding the actual burn-up. We'll identify those assemblies and identify the margins.
I'm not telling you. I just need enough to make the call. I don't need every bullet in the belt. I just need enough of them.
Okay.
And I'm sure that there are plenty. The other one is integral absorbers, the next line, and my question is what all do you have, and what are you using?
We're using IFBA right now. We previously used Zerk-clad B4C in alumina solid rods. Prior to that, we had Pyrex. We also have license for WABA. The WABA is bounded by the ZERC-clad solid rod BPRA. We demonstrate that as part of demonstrating what the limiting depletion characteristics are. The ZERC-clad BPRA also bounds IFBA. We demonstrate that as well. The one thing that's not covered here, and we're pretty clear that it's not covered, is a combination of maximum IFBA and maximum WABA simultaneously.
Yeah, well, if you decide you want to do that, and you don't have that in this analysis, that could eat up a lot of any margin that you've got.
Right. My mental model of that, Ken, is that there's a significant amount of margin available between ZERC-clad BPRA effects and IFBA by itself. The likelihood from a practical core design standpoint of having a large amount of IFBA and a large amount of WABA, the need to do that is pretty non-existent. If we were going to mix them, we would mix a little bit of one with a lot of the other, or a lot of one with a little bit of both. In other words, it wouldn't be a large perturbation to maximum IFBA, which we know is bounded. So the reality in 5059 space would be, if the core designers proposed to do that, we would evaluate it under 5059 and say, how much WABA could you add to your IFBA assembly such that it's still bounded by the limiting assembly design that we analyzed and submitted?
Yeah, I'm not sure how this, we can have a discussion at some point. I'm not sure how this goes down with licensing or the 5059. You may be able to come up and say the criticality is okay, but then the question is you now need a limit on, do you have to have some sort of limit on how much of each you can have at the same time?
Understand. If it's a concern, we could try to put some boundaries on it.
Well, I mean, right now you can submit it and say you're not analyzing it, so RSE would say it wasn't part of our review, and therefore the idea being is if you want to start putting them together, that would probably trip the change in methodology question. So that's a strategic decision on your guys' part to make.
Okay, well, what I can tell you is we have not used IFBA in combination with anything else except for source rods, which is covered in the analysis.
I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying it's, what my thinking is on how this would go down.
Okay.
Quick question on that. If we analyzed one combination of IFBA and WABA and had that in the LAR, then we would be allowed 5059 for other combinations?
Dale, the only thing I've seen so far are people do bounding. All the IFBA and all the WABA you're allowed. That's perhaps bounding. Perhaps it would be bounding for you. Perhaps it wasn't bounding for them. But at least I'd have to give that some more thought at this point, Dale.
Okay. Bob's the 5059 expert, not me. So.
Well, if it's his issue is that you would need some limitations on what you could do, and where do those limitations exist if they're not in the license, right? So it would be beneficial probably if we can, to put some maximum IFBA with WABA or maximum WABA with IFBA, put the boundaries around that and say what's demonstrated already to be allowable, and just live within those boundaries.
Yeah.
But to put it in up front and let them evaluate it as part of the safety evaluation, and put it as a license restriction if necessary.
Well, I mean, we've had people that take credit for herbal poisons and things like this. Is that it's one thing we usually don't put limits on it if people go to what they're maximum allowed to have. What the maximum design is for IFBAs and WABAs. But if somebody backs off that, and you're like, well, the question is how does somebody know 10 years from now not to buy that?
Sure, understand.